Moments after arriving in Sumeru for the first time, Paimon asks a simple question. Who do we believe the statue of the seven represents? Now, regardless of how we decide to answer this question, Paimon gives us a positive response for both. And I believe this is the starting point of lies, deception, and mirage shrouding the identity of the Dendro Archon. The question itself is an illusion, forcing us to choose between Lesser Lord Kusanali and the Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. But instead of accepting this one-dimensional outcome, I ask myself a different question. Why can't this statue be for both? With this possibility looming in my mind, I dove into the story to learn the truth behind Kusanali and Rukkhadevata. And what I quickly realized was that the sages, the Fatui, and even the Greater Lord herself might have been lying since the very beginning. But before we get into the madness of deceit, let's talk about the statue. Couldn't the people of Sumeru simply change the appearance? Well, the story tells us that this is likely improbable. Now, obviously, the statue of Mondstadt and Liyue never had to change because Venti and Zhongli are still alive. But in the case of Inazuma, even if the people had the ability to change the statue, they never had a reason because they didn't know Ei took over from Makoto. Obviously, it didn't matter because they're twins. But what about Sumeru? If you think about it, Kusanali only exists within dreams, and because the people of Sumeru cannot dream, they wouldn't know what she would look like. Even if the sages knew, I find it hard to believe that they would change the statue to look like the god that they despised. So if the statue never changed, why does it look like Kusanali? Let's start with the simple analogy, a coin. The coin itself does not change. However, each side of the coin symbolizes two different outcomes. Heads and tails. In similar fashion, I believe that the core identity of the statue remains constant but can represent both Kusanali and Rukkhadevata simultaneously, unironically making Paimon's two-sided answer accurate. And if this is true, then I believe there are several reasons on how this is possible. The first possibility is reincarnation. Now, immediately, this sounds like an outlandish idea, but if you have completed the Aranara World Quest, this thought is not so crazy to consider. Since the very beginning, the definition of existence to the Aranaras were always centered around the flow of cycle of life. They believed that once they reached their end, they would return to Sarva, which is defined as whole or all. The simplest way to understand this notion is that everything will return to soil, becoming one with the forest, then they will be reborn in the likeness of their former self. A very direct hint towards reincarnation. But there is one caveat to this form of rebirth. The newly reborn entity does not retain their past memories, and because memory and experience are what ultimately defines an individual, the lack of memory will make the reincarnation a different person. In essence, Kusanali is inherently different from Rukkhadevata, but she may have retained the appearance of her former self, just like the illusion of the moon created by the reflection of the sun. Now, if this first theory sounds unlikely or ridiculous, let's talk about the second theory, embodiment. What is the embodiment theory? To put it simply, it's the idea that Kusanali is a vessel that mirrors the previous gods. Alongside the cycle of life that we're probably familiar with by now, there's another reference that the writers use to craft the story of Sumeru, the trinity god of Hinduism known as Trimurti. In their belief, the creation of the world is linked to three deities, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Within Sumeru's story, we can notice something similar. The goddess of flowers, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, and the Scarlet King. I believe Kusanali is the vessel that visually and symbolically embodies the cycle of life. The creator of dreams, preserver of Sumeru, and even representing the destruction that may be looming in the future. And because Kusanali inherited the titles like Goddess of Flowers and God of Wisdom, maybe her visual representation of Rukkhadevata is possible. If you thought reincarnation and embodiment theories were off the wall, strap in because it's about to get crazier. The final reason as to why Kusanali might resemble Rukkhadevata in appearance is because Kusanali is a replica. Now, half of you are probably thinking I'm tripping on some shroomkins, but the other half of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Teresa Apocalypse, the obvious export from Honkai Impact Theory. Now, I believe that the story of Genshin and Honkai is not a direct one-to-one correlation. After all, Genshin Impact is a huge mixture of multiple inspirations. So to avoid a gigantic headache, let's stick with the main concepts. Long before the current story of Honkai Impact 3rd, Karen Kaslana dies, and after her death, Atto Apocalypse attempts to bring her back to life using the Honkai genes of Vishnu. Eventually, he succeeds in creating Teresa, but she is later deemed as a failed reincarnation. Now, am I suggesting that Kusanali is a clone? Well, technically, it's not impossible because we've already seen something similar in Genshin Impact. In Albedo, Scaramouche, and obviously, Catherine. But what's interesting about the creation of Teresa is that her backstory resembles both reincarnation and embodiment theories we mentioned previously. Just like the reincarnation theory, Teresa originates from Karen and solidifies her individuality without memories, and similar to the embodiment theory, she is the symbol of life stemming from three entities, Karen, Vishnu, and Atto. Maybe the reason why Kusanali might look like Rukkhadevata is not because of a singular reason, but the culmination of all three. Whatever the case may be, one thing becomes very clear. Even if they might look similar, Kusanali and Rukkhadevata are different beings. And I believe this is the root of all the madness in Sumeru, the sages, and the Fatui. Throughout the Archon quest, Kusanali uses many different analogies, most notably referring to herself as the moon. The simplest way to decipher this symbolism is that Kusanali is the reflection of the sun, which I speculate to represent Rukkhadevata. But I believe this analogy goes much deeper, and if we fully grasp the truth behind her words, it explains why the sages are in denial of her existence. Throughout history, the sun and the moon always functioned as the guiding light of humanity. But we know that the sun is much brighter than the moon. Symbolically speaking, because the illumination of the sun is so bright, it unveils everything in the world, allowing humans to live a simple and one-dimensional life without questioning or exploring different possibilities. However, I believe that everything changed with the introduction of Kusanali, or the moon. Like the sun, the moon also functions as a source of light or guidance, but they're much dimmer. And because the light of the moon is not as bright as the sun, it allows us to witness the stars underneath the night skies, symbolizing the dawn of ambition, aspiration, imagination, and dreams, which mirrors the concept of constellations within the night skies of Teyvat. Now, whether you agree or disagree with my interpretation, things are pretty suspicious if we take a look at how the sages are acting towards Kusanali. The sages have always treated the wisdom of their previous archon as gospel, but after her supposed death or the disappearance of the sun, they are confronted with a new ideology, the possibilities of imagination and dreams ushered in by Kusanali. The sages are basically boomers that refuse to accept new perspectives and are outright dismissing these abstractions in the name of blasphemy. And to counteract these conceptualization, they are attempting to seal and bind away the notion of dreams using the Akasha system, the legacy of Rukkhadevata, which illustrates the old beliefs that lack imagination and are riddled with ignorance. Interestingly, aside from the philosophical representation, the dreams related to Kusanali also poses a problem for the Fatui. We all know that the Fatui has one goal, the Dendro Gnosis, but the Gnosis is connected to the memories of the Irminsul tree and the dreams of Kusanali. For the Fatui to get their hands on the Gnosis, they would need to find a way to sever the connection between Kusanali and the tree, but there's a small problem. No one can physically see Kusanali because she currently exists within the realm of dreams. And I believe that this is the reason behind the Fatui's attempts of kidnapping children of the Vomara village, so that they can study the Aranada's ability to jump between the real world and the imaginary world. It's also possible that the Fatui are trying to harness the power of the Withering to corrupt and weaken the connection between Kusanali and the Irminsul tree. Now, obviously, I'm just speculating here, and I'm sure we'll eventually learn the answers, but there is something quite peculiar about the analogy of the sun and the moon. Kusanali claims inside the PV trailer that the sun is long gone. But if everything in Sumeru is related to the cycle of life, who's to say that the sun will never return? Maybe Rukkhadevata never truly died, but decided to step down by faking her own death to help humans understand the concept of imagination. Perhaps everything was a lie from the very beginning. But regardless of what really happened, the question remains, why isn't Kusanali doing anything? Before we get to the bottom of what's going on with Kusanali, I know a lot of these analogies and symbolism can get pretty confusing, so I just want to thank you for getting this far in the video. And if you're enjoying the video, hit the like button, and I don't know, consider subscribing? Let's talk about what's going on. Whether Kusanali is a reincarnation, an embodiment, or a replica, there's one thing that's certain. For the Irminsul tree and the Akasha system to continue, she is necessary for the sages whether they like her or not. But I have a gut feeling, or rather an odd suspicion, that the sages are keeping her hostage. Technically, the sages cannot seal her away completely because she can still traverse through the consciousness and dreams. But the main reason why I believe she is being imprisoned is because of the caged bird. During our first interaction with Kusanali in the Golden Apple Archipelago event, she refers to herself as a bird. And for some reason, when we encounter her for the first time in the Archon quest, the camera focuses on the bird again, but this time the bird is inside of a cage, which I believe could be foreshadowing the lack of freedom and the state of her imprisonment. Now, believe it or not, this depiction of a caged bird was hinted to us before, way back during the chasm. Now, the caged bird in the chasm was technically used to measure the gas level of the mine, but the reason why I believe they're all connected is because Sumeru's Archon quest, the Golden Apple Archipelago, and the chasm story all seems to be linked to the illusion of chaotic space and dreams, which are all relevant to the design of Kusanali and the realm of consciousness. I honestly believe that while her consciousness may be free to roam, her vessel is being imprisoned and locked up somewhere within the Akademiya by the corrupt sages of Sumeru. The irony of all this is that if Kusanali truly wants to be free and wants to exist in the physical world, her connection to the Irminsul tree, the Akasha system, and the realm of dreams would all have to be severed. Basically, for Kusanali to obtain her vessel, the sages will ultimately fall into the state of disarray. The Fatui will obtain the Dendronosis, and the Irminsul tree will undoubtedly be destroyed. And if any of this is true, that would explain why Kusanali is simply acting as an observer, because the entirety of Sumeru will completely fall into chaos. But the scariest part of all this is that we know damn well Kusanali will be a playable character, which means she would obtain a vessel and eventually exist in the physical world. But this is all theoretical anyway. I'm sure Sumeru will have a happy ending.